Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you can hear me. The session tonight is going to go on for about an hour, so we'll see how it goes through that. There'll be a question and answer session at the end. But what I want to do to begin with is I want to give you an overview as to what the session details are. So tonight, what I'm looking to discuss is the following. Just give me a second while technology takes its course. General updates, so I'll give you some ideas about some of the things that perhaps you'd like to know that have happened in the last few weeks in the school. Also, a little bit of information about our reopening capacity. As you know, we've opened up to a certain number of children, and I'll give you the reasons why we've done that and the rationale behind it and the guidelines that we're working to according to the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Health. We're going to then talk about the bubble concept. So you'll have heard this idea of the bubble concept. I'm sure you might be well aware of what the bubble concept is, but it's something that is critical to the success of our safety precautions. So I just want to give a little bit more information about what it is and how it actually works. And then I want to give you some information about what happens if we do have a positive COVID-19 case in school. And of course, I can't cover every single scenario there, but what I can do is give you an idea about the different things we do under a couple of scenarios. So at least it gives you an idea about the fact that we have procedures in place and what we're likely to do if we do have a positive COVID case in the school. And then I'll talk a little bit more about our precautionary procedures. So those of you who visited the school will have seen we put a significant number of precautionary procedures in place. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also have a video which shows some of the inside of the school, which of course you don't have access to at the moment. So again, you can get an idea when your sons and daughters are in their classes, what is it they are doing and how are we keeping them safe within those classrooms as well. And then finally, we'll have a question and answer session. So you'll notice, hopefully on the right hand side of your screen, there's an opportunity for you to type questions in. Just to let you know, the questions are, we've had two different sessions, or we will have two different sessions. Mrs. Hilton has already run a session based on the primary school last week. Mr. Moyes will be running a session on the secondary school on Sunday and Monday of next week. So the questions and answers will be based more on the content of this presentation. Hopefully Mrs. Hilton has already answered lots of questions for you about the primary school and how learning is working there, and Mr. Moyes will do the same thing next week. So what will happen with the question and answers, they go in. I have Mr. Moyes and Mrs. Hilton in at the moment as well, and they're looking through the questions, and when we get to the question and answer session, they're going to be facilitating that. So what will happen is they will publish a question that everybody can see, and then I will get the opportunity to answer that question as well. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the presentation then. And the first part I wanted to tell you about was the general updates. So what's new? What's happened in the school? Well, first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to say a very, very warm welcome to all of our new parents. We have a number of new parents joining us this year. A number of new parents who've moved from other schools within Qatar, but also have come into Qatar new. Thank you for choosing Park House. I would always say you've made a good decision, but I truly believe that you have. We have a fantastic team at the school, and I think you're going to find that the school you've chosen is one you're going to be very pleased with. The other side of it is the new staff. So we've had, as I'm sure if you're working in any industries here in Qatar, you'll have understood some of the difficulties of getting your new staff in, getting their work visas, getting their exceptional entry permits, etc., etc. I'm really pleased to say that all of our new staff are now in country. Our last new staff member came out of quarantine on Sunday, or came into school on Sunday out of their entry quarantine at least. That was our maths teacher, Sakari, who flew over from London. The one key person we don't yet have in the country, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is Mrs. Hilton. Mrs. Hilton has done a fantastic job, as you can see from that lovely smiley picture that we've got on the screen there. She's already had some sessions with the children in the classrooms to introduce herself, and from Oman. She's now actually in the UK. She moved from Oman to the UK at the weekend because she needs to do that for her entry permit, which is actually from the UK, because she's a British passport holder. So it seems that your exceptional entry permits are from your passport origin country rather than where you're actually geographically located. So she's now in the UK, desperate to come over. But as you will have seen if you're in the primary school, she ran 3 sessions for you. She's very much in charge of the primary school at this stage. She made a fantastic start, and we're really pleased with the way things are going. He's ably assisted by Anna Stewart, who's the new deputy head of primary, and Anna is feet on the ground, sorting it all out, and doing a brilliant job. So Anna has actually been in Qatar for 4 years. She was the deputy head of primary over at RGS Guildford, and she'd had 4 years experience of being a deputy head before that as well. So she could hit the ground running and really sort us out at the beginning of the school year. Mr. Vett, of course, is part of that team as well. So I think the three of those guys together means we've got a really strong primary team for this year as well. So I'm really delighted with that. And I know that Mrs. Hilton can't wait to meet you all face to face when she arrives. And we're hoping that will be very soon. We don't have a definite date, but we're very much hoping it'll be sooner rather than later. And the other thing I'd like to just give you some details of, you may have seen some of our social media posts, but I think this is a part of the school that we're all very proud of, and something that we do exceedingly well in, and that is our examination results. So just starting with our GCSE results, we had a fantastic A star to C, including English and Maths, rate of 93%. Nearly 60% of all of our grades were A star and A, which is thoroughly outstanding, as you can imagine. And actually we're at 100% pass rate. So we're delighted for those year 11 students getting those fantastic grades. Looking at our A-level students, we had similar kind of success. We had a fabulous A star and A, and again, you think about how difficult A-levels are. If any of you have sat A-levels, they are an exceedingly difficult qualification, a real step up from GCSE, but 42% of all grades were A star and A. And then we looked at well into the 70s, nearly 80% of our grades A star to B, which is fantastic, and again 100% pass rate. So we're very proud of those grades. And I think looking at those compared to other schools within Qatar, and of course we compare ourselves to other British schools in Qatar, it is, having done lots of research of grades that have happened this year, actually there appears to be only one highly selective British school which has got better grades than us. So I think we sit here very proud of our students, very thankful for our teachers for all the fantastic work they do, and I hope that gives you comfort that as you come through the school, the quality of the learning within the school is fantastic and our children are achieving at the highest levels. The children who have taken their A-levels, or the students rather, have taken their A-levels, are now moving on to universities. As you will know, there was a lot of controversy over the few weeks around the A-level results coming out. So it meant that university entrance was a little bit chaotic in the UK, and most of our students have got into their universities of choice if they were going to the UK or around the world. But a few who were going to the UK have decided to defer for 1 year. But they've all got the grades they need to do to get into the universities they need to get into. So a little bit of upheaval there, but eventually they will all get themselves to the university of choice, which is fantastic for them, and we're really pleased. So just moving on then to the other topics tonight. One of the things that is probably on people's minds is why have we got 1/3 of our students in and not 50%? Because what we have within schools in Qatar is a variety of different percentages of students being allowed in. I'll give you an example of this. So our sister school here, owned by ISP, is Hamilton International School. It's in its 2nd year of operation. If any of you have seen Hamilton, it's a very impressive school, lots of fantastic facilities. It isn't Parkhouse, I have to say, with that rather lovely feel you get when you walk into our school, but it's still very impressive. And we work very closely with them to support them in opening. They have a capacity of around 2,400 children, I think, and their role is significantly less than that. Now, what the Qatar authorities have said, what the Ministry of Education have said, is actually your capacity for the number of children you're allowed into the school is actually based upon not the number of children you have in school, but your licensed capacity. So if you're licensed to have 2,400 children in your school, then you're allowed up to 30% of that in your school at any one time, which of course you're talking about 700 odd students in the case of Hamilton. Now, because Hamilton don't have 700 students in their school, they of course are allowed to have all of their students in all of the time, which I think is good for them. But as they grow, of course, that will change. You will know of other schools perhaps that have moved on to a brand new campus this year and are operating at 50%. Well, the reason why they're doing that is because their licensed capacity is much greater than the number of students they actually have, and eventually, of course, they'll get up to the licensed capacity. So to give you an idea from our perspective, we're a 27-year-old school, exceedingly popular, and actually it might surprise you to know that actually our licensed capacity at Parkhouse is actually 1,788 students. Now that doesn't, I will stress this before I have anyone saying or asking a question about whether or not we're going to go up to 1,788 students. The simple answer to that is we're not. We're actually at what we consider to be our capacity. And this is something that I've worked very closely with ISP, our owners, on, to say that I believe that 1,460 is our maximum capacity as a school. So therefore, even though we have a capacity of 1,788 on paper, practically, and certainly for the children's learning, we feel that 1,460 is an appropriate number of students to have on campus. And as such, we will not be going above that number at any time. I can assure you of that. So what does it mean? It means, well, okay, we're allowed to have 30% of 1,788 onto school campus at any one time. And that means that we can have up to 536 students, 537 if you round it up, students in the school at any one time. So that's our restriction. So when we were looking at our calculations and looking at our different year groups, bearing in mind we are a fully open school going from nursery all the way up to year 13, we had to, of course, limit our capacity to that 536. What it meant in the first instance, as many of you will know, is that the majority of our students are in, we've actually got 33.33% of our students in, about a third of our students in, because we can go a little bit above the 30% based on that 1,788. But what it does mean for some of our year groups, for instance, our year 11 students and our year 13 students, we can actually have them in 50% of the time. So whilst the majority of our students at this point in time are in 33% of the time, 1 in every 3 days, we've actually got 1 or 2 groups of students, 2 year groups of students who are in 50% of the time, which we think is great. The reason why we made that decision to get our year 11s and year 13s in is because if you think back to last year and think about the fact that GCSE and A-level courses are really 2-year courses, a significant amount of the students weren't in school for the latter part of their learning for that year. And even though they were doing distance learning and all progressing very well, we felt to give them the best possible opportunity going into their GCSE year this year, that having them in 50% of the time was probably the most sensible decision. What we've done this week is after a week of opening, we've actually had a look at, well, how many students actually came into school in the last week. And we can see that there's a variety of different numbers. Now, the whole sibling puzzle we put in place was quite a challenge. So different days we have different numbers of students come in. But what it does mean, and I'm not going to announce what they are as yet, but we're actually looking at other year groups coming in a little bit more often as well. So perhaps we're looking at some of the children or some of the students rather up in year 10 and year 12 coming in. Certainly year 12 in the first instance, and 10 would come a little bit later. And also we're looking at the very bottom end of our school. So we're looking at the nursery students and those students in reception to see, because those children really need to be in school to get their routines. So we're going to try and get those guys in as often as we can as well. But we're still working those through. So there's not something I can tell you absolutely concrete today, but we will announce that we'll have some year groups in for 50% of the time. So that's good news, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. The ideal scenario for us, of course, in terms of the children's learning is that we have more children in more often, but of course we have to be very careful and make sure that we're adhering to what are essentially very strict Ministry of Education and Higher Education guidelines. So we are not making these decisions off our own backs. We are making these decisions because we're told very sensibly, I believe as well, by the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, that we have to limit the number of children we have in school, so that we have correct safety protocols in place. We can socially distance. When the children are sat in their classrooms, they're not sat particularly close to other children, and there's room for the teacher to move around the front as well. So there's lots and lots of very sensible reasons why they've made that decision. We hope if we start to see the infection rates in Qatar decrease, that we will have more children coming into school. But at this point in time, it's not something that we've been given permission to do, so we adhere to those guidelines and work within the best way that we possibly can. So looking at this whole bubble concept, what does it actually mean? Well, if you think about the school as one big bubble, we've got 1,460 children, we've got about 157 staff in school, so that is the Park House bubble. But of course, that's a little bit too high level to have any effectiveness in terms of the scope of our safety procedure precautions and doing everything we can to prevent the spread of COVID within our school. So then you look a little bit further down and you see that actually you can split the school down into several different year groups. So there in our early years, in a completely separate building, we have our nursery and our reception students. Then we have our primary school going from year 1 up to year 6, our secondary school going from year 7 up to year 13, And you can see the 11s and 13s are at the bottom there because they're slightly different. As I said earlier, they're coming in 50% of the time. But again, that's not the bubbles that we put in place, because when we're looking at having a third of our students in at any one time, we actually look more at this kind of pattern. So when we take our primary school, going from nursery to year 6, you can see that what we've done is we've split them up, as you will know, into group A, B and C. And for these children, I'm sure your sons and daughters have told you all about this, they actually stay in their room with their classroom teacher, and when they have a specialist teacher, they won't move to a different specialist room as perhaps they would do under normal circumstances. They actually have the specialist teacher visit that classroom. What it means in practical terms is that if you take, say, let's just take year 1 as an example. So we have 4 forms of entry in year 1, and each form of entry is then split up into 3 different groups. So actually we have 12 groups of children coming into school in year 1 over the course of 3 days. And the children who are in group A, for instance, will not mix with the children in group B and will not mix with the children in group C. So what we're looking at, dependent on our sibling puzzle, we're looking at anything between maybe about 6 or 7 children in a class up to probably a maximum of about 10. So those children will not move around or not have contact with any more than 10 children. And within their class, they will also be socially distanced from the children within their class as well. So they'll be sat at a desk that's away from their classmates where possible. In the primary school, certainly, even though it's not mandated, we feel it's sensible that children, where possible, wear their face masks. And of course, in the secondary school, it's mandated. You then go to the secondary school, exactly the same kind of concept. And actually, where secondary schools are very different to primary schools, for those of you who have secondary school children, or just cast your minds back to when you were in the secondary school, it's different to primary schools, because what you do is you generally move between lessons. So you go from an English lesson to a maths lesson, you'll move to that maths room, the teacher stays where they are, you'll move to a science lab, you'll move to the art room, etc., etc. Well, what we've had to do, and again, this is based upon the guidelines that we've been issued by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Health, we've actually got the teachers now going to the classrooms. So you can see there the children stay in the same classroom, the form tutor and the specialist teachers actually visit that classroom and teach at the front of the room. The students within those classrooms are socially distanced again. They will stay in there for the whole day. They're not allowed out at this point across the whole school for breaks and lunches. As you know, there's no movement to subjects such as PE, because that's something that we're not allowed to do at this point in time. But it means again that in the secondary school, in years 7, 8 and 9, they mix within a very small group of students, and therefore any issues we have can be contained very quickly and very easily. When you then go to years 10 to year 13, it's slightly different up in the top end of the school, because when you get to GCSE and A-level, of course, our students will have lots of different option groups. So everybody takes a GCSE, for instance, maths, English and science. But they might then take, out of a variety of different options, they will take 4 different subjects. So it might be they take geography, history, art and drama, for instance. They might take a different combination dependent on their different interests and the kind of subjects they want to take. So we can't have a situation where the teachers go to the classrooms, because they need to move around. So what we've done here is we've created the bubble as being the year group itself. And the year group, Group A. So it's not the whole year group, it's the Group A, Group B for our year 11 and year 13. And for our year 10 and our year 12, it's the Group A, the Group B and the Group C bubble. So we're still reducing the number of students within those bubbles, but not as much as we would do for 7, 8 and 9. So what we've done to try to minimise the risk here is, rather than again those students move around the whole school as they would do ordinarily, we've actually limited them to a specific number of classrooms. Around 5 classrooms we've said that those students will move between. And if those students move around, they do so in a very specific way. I'll play a little video to you later on, and you'll see that we've got things like a one-way system around our secondary school to make sure that students aren't crossing in the corridors, they're socially distancing and that kind of thing. So where we have 10 to 13, it's a little more difficult, but I think, again, we've put some very practical measures in place to make sure they don't move. Just addressing that PE issue, I know that we were doing PE for the first couple of days. One of the challenges I think we've had as a school, and this certainly isn't a criticism of anyone or anybody in terms of anyone that we're working with, the picture has sometimes been a little unclear, should we say, as to what we can and we can't do. And we haven't necessarily had a very clear set of written instructions. And of course, as I say, there's no one to blame for that because it's exceedingly difficult to operate under these circumstances. And of course, we're all finding our feet as all the schools here in Qatar are finding their feet, and things change quite regularly. So what we had to start with is a belief that we could do PE. We had a meticulously planned PE curriculum, and that PE curriculum was based upon students going to the gym. They were changed, so there's no contact in the changing rooms, and we had some sports set up which would enable them to socially distance in an appropriate way, all equipment being sanitized, etc., etc. But we were hearing more stories of schools being criticised for running PE when they were inspected by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Public Health. So in order to get a picture of this, I actually managed to speak directly to the director of private schools over in the Ministry of Education, who told me categorically that we couldn't run PE for the time being. So that was a shame, but again, she explained the reasons, and it was very much in conjunction with the Ministry of Public Health, so we can understand why they're doing it, and as such we stopped PE with immediate effect. Although we are trying to offer an online provision of PE, and our PE teachers are going into classrooms as well to make a contribution to other areas of the curriculum as well. So that's the reason for PE. So let's just have a look at some scenarios then. So for instance, we might and we will have over the next few weeks and months, I think, some situations in the school that we have to deal with. We have already had some situations in the school that we've had to deal with, but I'm very pleased to say at this point in time we've actually worked really, really well to contain those situations, and there's been minimal impacts in the school on a wide scale. There's been some impact to individuals in terms of having to stay off school, but we haven't had a single in-school case of transmission case of COVID thus far, which I think is great and speaks volumes for our precautionary procedures. So if we have a look at this particular scenario on the screen in front of you now, this is randomly chosen, by the way. This isn't representing a real case. This is just what could happen. So we take a primary school child, we look at 6P, so 1/4 of year 6, split then down into thirds. So we're talking about probably about, say, let's just say 9 children there in Group A. So there's a parent of a child in class 6P, Group A, who tests positive, displays symptoms, or has had contact with a person who's tested positive. So what I've done here is broken it down into 2 areas of responsibility at this point. The first one is going to be very clearly what we feel your responsibility as parents is. And number one, and I think this is critically important, is that if you have a situation like this, under no circumstances should you send your child or any siblings, in fact, to school until you have a clearer picture. But we also need to know about it. So you should inform the school, and our preference for the primary school is the class teacher or the head of primary, and for the secondary school would be the form tutor or the head of secondary. And I'll talk about our internal communication strategy a little bit further as to why we want a very select group of people to be communicated with. And what we also need, of course, is the parent who, if they're displaying symptoms or had a contact with a person who's tested positive, it's appropriate for you to have a COVID test, so we can then start to look at the elimination of that if we need to. And of course, fingers crossed, we hope that if you are symptomatic or you have had contact, that actually it's a negative test and it's something else. And if you have had a positive test, well, then we'll move into a different stage with your children. So if we then have a test, or we suspect it's a test, what our response will be, first of all, is that, taking 6P Group A as the example, we will contact the parents of any children in that bubble and siblings if we feel that's necessary as well, and ask them just to stay at home pending the results of the parent COVID test. And if the parent is positive, what we would then do is ask for the son or daughter of that parent to be tested for COVID as well. We would also be asking under these circumstances for the teacher and TA to be asked to stay at home pending those results. Let's move across to some flowcharts now to show you what would happen. So let's just say we get to the parent, and the parent has their COVID test. There are 2 possible scenarios, of course. There's a negative test, which we keep our fingers crossed it's always the case, but in reality is not going to always be the case. And then there's the positive case. So if there's a negative case, then actually immediately, of course, all of the other students and the staff can return to school. And that's following to the letter the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Public Health guidelines. Now, as far as the child of the parent is concerned, we'd have to take advice from the Ministry of Public Health in conjunction with you as a parent to see whether we feel it's appropriate for that child to come back to school. It is likely under these circumstances that if you are asked to isolate for 14 days, your children will need to isolate with you for 14 days. But again, we take the Ministry of Public Health advice on that. If the result of the parent COVID test is positive, then of course the first step for you is to make sure that you arrange for your child and any siblings to be tested. Now, one of the things here, the negative bit is missing, but it's on the left-hand side of this particular flow chart. If it's negative, then of course the other students and the staff can return to school, but the children and the siblings would have to self-isolate for 14 days. That's the information that we have. So that's the best case scenario, that we have negative tests. If, however, your child and any siblings in the house are tested as positive, then we are, under the guidance of the Ministry of Public Health, then obliged to contact them with the Ministry of Education, with the contact details of everybody within the bubble, and also the staff members as well. Now, you will have been communicated with thoroughly by this stage. You should never ever have a surprise telephone call from the Ministry of Public Health to say that there's an issue within a particular class, because of course in the first instance, because we want to be very careful about these things, we will have contacted you to tell you that as a precautionary measure, you will need to stay off school. And then when we do have to then contact the Ministry of Public Health, of course, we will tell you before we contact the Ministry of Public Health as well, so that you are aware of that. And what happens from that stage, and we have had an experience of this in the school, and as I say, we actually, it was a positive ending because not a single child did test positive subsequently. But what the Ministry of Public Health will want for that bubble is they want the children within that bubble to all be tested. We actually had an opportunity last week to send a group of children to the Wyndham Hotel. You may know that's one of the testing centres they have, and all of those children came back negative, which is brilliant news. However, they still needed to isolate for 14 days, so they were due to come back after that. But our next steps, we're very much led by the Ministry of Public Health. We don't make the decisions at this point about what happens. It's the Ministry of Public Health. I must say that when we had the incident in school, the Ministry of Public Health were fantastic. They really were. They were really fabulous to deal with. They were very accessible. Their response times were outstanding, and the way they dealt with the school, and we then liaised with all of the parents involved. It was around about 7 or 8 groups of people who were involved, parents and children, that is, within one bubble. I think that the experience generally was actually very, very positive, and we were really impressed with the way things have been dealt with. They really seem to have thought about how they're going to deal with it. So that's the scenario then if we have a test. Now, I've just described this one. This is where you would all be tested at Wyndham Hotel, and if you're negative, you come back after 14 days, and if you're positive, well, we have to take the Ministry of Public Health guidelines, follow the Ministry of Public Health guidelines. One of the things that we are trying to get a little bit of clarity on at the moment is there is something that we're quoted to as about a fitness to return certificate, which we need for one particular family in the school, and nobody seems to know what that is when you try to get one. So we're just trying to get to the bottom of that at the moment. But again, I think we'll get to that pretty quickly and pretty easily. But the theory is, of course, that as soon as green lights come back onto SRAS apps and everyone's given the go-ahead, then everybody comes back to school, which is, of course, what we want. So then moving on to the scenario with a teacher. A teacher, of course, is slightly more problematic, and we're very, very clear with our teachers that whilst we can't expect them to stay within the 4 walls and just within the school all the time, that when they're out and about, they are taking as many precautionary procedures as they possibly can to protect themselves and others. But there is, of course, a possibility that one of our teachers may test positive, or may indeed have a contact with somebody who's positive. And of course, when you talk about a teacher, they're not just within that Group A bubble, they're within the Group A, B and C bubble, dependent on the contact they had with their students. So it becomes a little bit wider for us to deal with. But again, something that we just deal with systematically should it happen. So we look at the teachers, and we're very clear, again, very, very clear with our teachers that they need to be very open and transparent with us, and need to make sure they tell us the first opportunity they have once they find out that they've either had contact with somebody who's positive, they have any symptoms, they will need to isolate immediately before they even go for their test. At this point, we would contact all the parents who are in any group that teacher is in, and ask them to stay at home. Again, I don't think there's anything to be concerned about there. That is just simply us being cautious about the way forward and making sure that, that we're putting as many precautionary procedures in place as we can. So if the teacher tests positive, now we haven't at this point had one of these scenarios, but if they do test positive, then again, it's exactly the same procedure as the students. We must liaise with the Ministry of Public Health to inform them, and the Ministry of Public Health, it's highly likely, as I say, we haven't experienced this yet, so we don't know what the response would be, but we feel it's highly likely that all student contacts would then need to be isolated and most probably be tested as well. Now, of course, if the teacher is negative, then if they've been in contact with, if they have symptoms and been negative, we would ask them to stay at home just to isolate, to make sure those symptoms don't develop. And if they did develop further, we need to ask them to go for another test. If they were in contact with somebody who has tested positive, in close contact, even if they tested negative, we would still ask them to stay off school for 14 days to make sure that they get through the whole isolation quarantine type process before they would be allowed back onto the school site. So we're taking our responsibilities very, very seriously with that. Just going on to our communication strategy, I just wanted to share with you the content of an email that I sent to our staff last week. And there's a lot of similarities between how we would deal with it as a school and how really we'd want the community as a whole to deal with it as well. And I think as far as that first paragraph is concerned, I hope you can see this quite well. The bit in bold there is that you will be informed of an issue when there is an issue to inform you about. So if there is an issue with one of the classes that your son or daughter is in, then we will let you know at the first available opportunity if there is something to be concerned about. So we're not going to expect you to find out through the grapevine. We're not going to expect you to find out through various bits of speculation and rumour. Again, we take our responsibilities exceedingly seriously, and we will be making contact with you if we feel there's an opportunity for you to stay at home because there is a situation that we need to be aware of, and keep an eye on it developing, so we can also look at the next steps if there are any. We will be doing, therefore, a thorough job of the contact tracing, and if any member of staff has had contact, you will be informed, and we'll also be informing you about the steps that we'll be taking. One of the things I said to the staff, and it's very important, this is, I think, that of course over the last few months and weeks we've faced a lot of rumour, a lot of speculation. It's difficult not to deal with that. I think it takes a lot of willpower and a lot of strength of character, I think, to make sure that people don't indulge in rumour and speculation, because it's all around you and people react to things in many, many different ways. Some people react very calmly, some people don't react quite so calmly, and therefore actually there can be lots of conversations that go on which might not necessarily be a full portrayal of what is actually going on. But one of the things I'm saying to our staff is that actually the most important thing they should do under these circumstances is to stay very, very calm. Because actually if they don't stay calm, and we don't stay calm as a school and deal with this in a very rational and logical and thorough way, that actually we're not dealing with it properly. So the four things I talked to our staff about what is important are those ones in green there. So being calm, making sure that we have a very calm approach to this. Secondly, maintaining confidentiality. One of the things that we won't be doing, and I hope you understand the reasons for this, we won't be sending out a contact to the whole school community every time we have a suspected COVID issue or otherwise, because we will keep that very much within the sphere of people who are affected by that, and the bubble concept is key to that. If the bubble concept is effective, then actually we only need to inform the people that are within that bubble as well. So we don't send out whole school communications. We won't send out whole to our teachers and other staff. We won't be sending out whole communications to our parents either. We will only be contacting the people who need to be contacted, because we believe that confidentiality is really, really key here to maintain a very calm and purposeful environment. Really key as well is this idea of being judgmental and actually the key is to be non-judgmental. This is as we've seen over the last few weeks and months, it's completely random. This situation is. We can take as many precautionary procedures as we possibly can, but actually there are situations where people will get COVID, even if they've been as careful as they can possibly be. There might well be a situation where they contract COVID-19, and I certainly know, and I'm sure you do, of a few situations where that seems to have happened. So as a school, we will be completely non-judgmental. We will not be criticising anybody for any situation they face. And I would like to put that out there to the community as well, that is how it should be. And certainly as a school, within our school staff, we'll be making sure that is strictly adhered to as well. And actually, the most important thing I think for us all is to maintain professionalism. So maintain professionalism by dealing with it in a very professional way, by adhering to the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Public Health guidelines, making sure we're keeping our school community as safe as we possibly can. And really, as I said earlier, the integrity of the bubble concept is key to be able to contain anything that might be facing us. So if we have a very small number of children who are affected or potentially affected, then the bubble concept makes sure it's contained to that very small number of children. And as I said, based upon the precautionary procedures we put into the school, the likelihood of any in-school transmission, I think, is very, very low. We can never say never, but I think it's very, very low. And you'll see some of the things we're doing when I play a video to you in just a second. So what we've done over the weeks before school opened, before everybody came back, is we did a lot of planning to make sure that we had every precautionary procedure we possibly could have in place to make sure that everyone was safe. You will have seen the reopening brochure, you'll have seen the very structured entry and exit, which seems at this point to be going very well. So I'm very grateful to you for making sure you stick to that and making sure you embrace the spirit of what that is and being very patient with it as well. I think one thing I would say is that I've never had, quite honestly, so many positive comments as I've walked around the school outside, which is brilliant to see, because it means that people are feeling safe and feeling that we're doing the right thing for our community. So we did a lot of work for entry and exit. We also did a lot of work within the school as well to make sure that when children are within their classrooms and moving around the school, they wouldn't have contact with others. They would also be minimising their contact with each other as well. It's not an easy school day, let's face it, for our children. They're in their classrooms, they are not having their breaks and lunches, they're not seeing a wide circle of friends. We hope to get back to that as soon as possible. I think if everybody adheres to the precautionary guidelines as much as they can, we're much more likely to be able to get back to a more what we consider normal school life than perhaps we've got at the moment. Now, what I'm going to show you now is actually a video of our precautionary procedures. So I'm going to send this over so I'm not on the side of it so you can watch it. It'll take me a second just to launch it, but this gives you an idea about what we as a school are actually doing to make sure our school community stays safe. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good insight into what the school's doing to try and keep you safe. It's there's lots of things within the school site there. You will have seen things like the one-way system, for instance, that the secondary school have. You'll have seen at the very end there the misting machines. They allow us to disinfect the whole school. Every single part of the school is disinfected every single night. And in fact, where we have heavy use areas such as doors, door handles, etc., we actually have our team of facility staff going round throughout the day, multiple times a day, making sure that those particular areas are sanitised as well. You'll have seen the thermographic cameras. So our primary and secondary students will walk through those thermographic cameras to make sure that we're picking up on any students who have a temperature that's above acceptable level. But also, one of the really fascinating things about these machines is they will actually pick up on people not wearing a mask as well. So it'll beep out to you, please put your mask on as you walk past if you're not wearing a mask, which I think is quite good. And of course, our nurses in the auditorium are manning those machines, but also we have one in the early years and we have one around the back of our year 1 and 2 corridor. So lots and lots of things around the school. You'll see the desks spaced out. You'll have seen the fact that teachers are stood at the front of the classroom. They're not doing the moving around the classrooms as they ordinarily would, but they're making sure they stay as safe as possible. So that is an idea, at least, about some of those precautionary procedures. Now, I will move on to questions and answers. So Mr. Moyes and Mrs. Hilton will have been very busy now just putting some questions live. So I think on your screen you can see there, I think it's called, there's a section on the left hand side of your screen which is highlighted questions. So they've put some questions forward which I'll read through and then answer. So first one will start at the very top, and this one says, how would the current temporary approach to education impact students' learning, and what is the school doing to offset any potential shortcomings? It's an interesting one, this is, because I think around the world, of course, schools have had an issue with school attendance. And I think this idea that any children is going to fall vastly behind their peers in certain year groups is not necessarily the case. We are putting certainly in years 10, 11, 12 and 13, putting some fairly robust process in place to make sure that the examination groups aren't actually compromised in any way. We would expect our children at that area of the school to be independent learners. I think the really good thing that's going to come out of this, I believe, is that we're going to have a generation of students who are going to be much more independent than perhaps they would have been had they not have experienced this. It's not something that we all relish, of course, but there are many advantages from a learning perspective that will come through on this. And I've heard conversations about children are too young to be independent. Well, of course, we don't expect our very youngest children to be acting exceedingly independently, but when we start to get towards the top end of the primary school and going to the secondary, we do think that our children have the capability of being able to operate independently. So in terms of educational impact, I don't believe there's going to be a huge educational impact. Children don't progress anyway in a linear way. They actually progress at various different stages throughout their school year. We hope to get our children back as soon as possible, but I don't believe that this approach is going to have a detrimental impact on any of our year groups in the longer term. I think it's just something that we're putting more and more things in place to make sure that doesn't happen. The second one, what about parents with people with conditions such as diabetes, heart and lung disease? Should they send their children to school? This is very much your decision. Well, what the government have said is that you can, if you have a child who has what's known as a chronic condition, and there are a list of chronic conditions that are published by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Public Health. If you have a child with a chronic condition, you can choose to send them to school. What we've done is we have a letter which we send out, which just asked you to say that you understand the risks of sending your child to school, and just ask you to sign it and send it back. If you don't choose to send your child to school, then actually you are entitled to do so, but what you have to get is a chronic, what they call a chronic disease exemption form. And that can be done. We have a process. We send that out to some of our parents. If you need that, please let us know. We'll send that out to you. If you have a relative living within the same household who has a chronic disease and you believe that sending your child to school would be potentially detrimental to them, again, the procedure exists that your child doesn't have to come to school if they have this exemption certificate as well. So You're very welcome to send them to school. You must understand the risks of that. You must weigh up the risks yourself. We're happy to have children in school, but that is really, it is your risk to send your child to school. We will make sure that, of course, our precautionary procedures are where they need to be, but we cannot eliminate any risk, of course. So really, it has to be very much dependent on you. How often do you plan on testing your teachers and staff? This is especially important considering in many cases the PCR tests are known to yield fake negatives. Look, I don't know about the fake negative bit, but what I do know is that every single member of staff, including our security guards, our site staff, our teaching assistants, our office staff, our teachers, myself, we were all tested prior to school opening. I think that was a really important thing for us to do. And we were all negative, which is really very encouraging to see. What I believe is going to happen, if we have any suspicions within the school or anyone has any contact, of course our strategy is going to be immediately that a staff member is tested. What we believe as well is that the Ministry of Education in conjunction with the Ministry of Public Health will actually be doing tests throughout the school, so throughout the different schools, and I think that's something that that we'll have as a school. We'll no doubt have a Ministry of Health individuals coming in and doing some of those tests, which we of course will comply absolutely 100% with anything that's asked for, because it's as much in our interest as in yours to make sure that our staff are of course negative. Are there any plans to improve the online classes? Online classes are quite difficult, I think, with this particular scenario. The Ministry of Education are very insistent that children come to school. The only time children should not come to school is if they have a chronic disease exemption certificate. We actually had 2 weeks grace for that, and we're actually being asked to put people as absent if they don't come to school and they don't have that chronic disease exemption certificate. One of the things we are doing, and of course, what a teacher is doing on a day-to-day basis is they are standing in front of a group of 8 to 10 children and teaching those children. We are at the moment, and they actually arrived yesterday, we ordered them some time ago, but of course there are some supply issues with these kind of things. We actually have webcams for every single classroom that are now being installed so that we can have some opportunity for the students to see the teacher teaching. But of course what the teacher is doing is teaching the class in front of them. They're not doing online distance learning. This is not distance learning, this is blended learning, where you come into school, most of your teaching is done in the school, and then actually the work, a normal lesson you see, and is not necessarily just about the teacher standing at the front and teaching. A normal lesson is where you will have these children doing activities, group work, etc., etc. Now, the approach that we're taking is we're taking the teacher side of the lesson and we're doing all of that in the day they're in school, and then the other things they would do within their lessons are then being done at home. So it's very much about the teacher and the teacher actually teaching when they're in, and they should have the work then, or they do have the work to be able to complete at home. We appreciate that the more parental involvement as the children are younger as well. So online classes are not going to be distance learning as we had going forward. We can't have online lessons where every single lesson is online for a student, because the way the 3 or 2 day rotation works is we're teaching the same content essentially to the children for 3 days running, so that everybody gets the same experience, and then they do their work at home and they get some support. So it'll be a different way of working, but under no illusions that this is not a distance learning proposition. This is a blended learning proposition. If we have to go to distance learning, we're very ready to do that. We've learned lots of lessons last year. We've reviewed it. We have people like Mrs. Hilton in the school now as well, who's had lots of experience. Mrs. Stewart, who's also had lots of experience in different schools. So we have lots of ideas about how we might do distance learning, but that's only if the school closes for any reason, and we hope it doesn't. But if it does, then rest assured we would kick straight into a distance learning proposition. When do we expect all kids to go to school every day? Do you know what? I can't wait for that to happen. I really can't. It was great to have those kids back in school on that first day. It was tough for all of us, I think. You know, we didn't become teachers to teach via computer. We became teachers to interact with students in the classrooms, to see the kids develop as they go through, to see the kids making friends and doing collaborative things and doing collective sport and collective drama, all those kind of things. So the sooner we can have them back into school on a normal timetable, the better. My belief, and this is just my belief, this is not anything official, is that once we start to see cases perhaps going to below 100 a day, we might start to see some movement and have a few more children back into school. But I think we need to be realistic that we're a very, very short way into this way of working. And whilst I do believe it's been very successful in terms of getting kids back in again and getting them back into the learning environment, I don't think we in the immediate future are going to see all children back in school. I would hope to see some movement on that before the end of this school year. I hope it's going to be phased. I hope they're going to have some an increase in students to see how that goes as well. Please could I spread this nice presentation by email? Of course I will, and thank you very much for calling it a nice presentation as well. Of course we'll send that out. We'll make sure you get that so you can see it. Can the current system be improved whereby 30% of students are in school at the same time students at home can see or watch live? Now we are doing that through our Day C, and again Mrs Hilton and Mr Moyes will give some more detail on that. The reason why we don't play it every day is because if you're in group, if Group A are in school and Group B and C are at home, then Group B and C just watch the lessons of Group A, and then when they come in for Group B the next day or Group C the day after, they see exactly the same thing they've just seen on the screen. So actually the day essentially is just staggered by 2 days for Group C or 1 day for Group B, because the last time Group A are in, they will have 2 days of work set for them. The last time of this term or the last point of this blended learning, they will have 2 days of work after them. So even though a child may have started on day 3 of the school year, essentially they will have 2 days worth of work after their last time they come in. So if you get my meaning on that, they won't therefore have less work to do or not doing work. So live sessions are, we're not going to run live sessions for every single day. We're going to run them on Day C so that you can either have a refresher if you're in A or B, or alternatively you're not in school for whatever reason, you can see the lesson that people would have had they been in the blended learning. The video shows staff wearing face shields but no mask. This is not recommended. Look, we have complied with every single instruction by the Ministry of Public Health and Ministry of Education. We have been inspected by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Public Health. We've been told very clearly that when teaching, the teachers can wear face shields, and having spoken to colleagues in other schools around Qatar, that is also the approach we're taking. So this idea that it's not recommended, actually it is recommended to a it's perfectly acceptable as far as the Ministry of Public Health and Ministry of Education are concerned. And for teaching, if you have a face mask when you're teaching, of course the children can't see your mouth move, they can't understand necessarily what you're saying. So the teachers will make sure they're distanced away from the children, they'll be wearing their face shield properly. And at a point at which the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Public Health changed their tack on that, we will of course comply, but at this point in time, we're happy that we're compliant. PE classes are not currently authorised. Would you currently allow students to come to school in their PE uniform instead of school uniform? We would prefer students to come in their school uniform. The school uniform exists for uniformity by nature of its definition. We know there's some supply issues, so if you can't get your school uniform because of those supply issues with our uniform supplier, then of course wearing a PE kit is not something that we would object to, but we would please ask for you to get a school uniform as soon as possible, because of course as soon as school comes back again, we would expect you to be wearing your school uniform and PE kit as appropriate. What will happen after the October midterm? Will the rotation continue as now? It will continue as now, as far as we know. We hope to have some movement on that before October. And of course, if there's any change on that, we will let you know. We'll be delighted if there is a change on that. But at this point in time, there isn't necessarily a change in that. Thank you. That's a very nice comment about our efforts not being unappreciated, which is fabulous. Thank you so much, because it is hard work, I have to say. And our teachers are absolutely working their socks off. They are working far harder than they would work if they had the children in school. So I think it's good that you have appreciation for that as well. We're asking a lot of our teachers, we really are. They're barely having any breaks during the day. They are having children in from 6:45 in the morning, when actually they don't normally have children in the school building until after 7. So they're putting a lot of extra hours in, and of course what that means is the planning and preparation they have to do, the marking and assessment, all has to be done after hours. They don't have any opportunity to do that during the school day. So it's incredibly hard work for our teachers, but they're up for it. They're doing a fantastic job, and we're very pleased with the way things are going for them. OK, so if a student or staff is tested positive, what happens for a period of 14 days when the child is quarantined? So you'll be, it'll be exactly the same as if you have a chronic condition certificate. Day C lessons will be online. You'll be able to get the learning from them, and we will of course be providing the work through Teams. We're really pleased that we've made the decision to move onto Teams down to year 1. It gives us much more flexibility to have that interaction. We didn't feel that Class Dojo was actually suitable for that, and that was proven really during the last part of distance learning. And going to Microsoft Teams gives us uniformity across the school as well. We will be live streaming lessons, as I said, on Group C. Will the school be ready to accommodate any sudden decision regarding full opening of face-to-face? Absolutely. Can't wait, quite honestly, for that decision to come through. I think we all sit here waiting for that. We will be immediately ready for anything. You know, for the whole summer we were working on every single scenario that we possibly could about what would happen, whether we continued with distance learning, whether we had X percentage of students in school, whether we had full face-to-face learning. If you remember from the very first iteration of the opening guidelines, it was that we'd have a smaller proportion of students in, going up to 50%. Then from the 20th of September, it's going to be full face-to-face learning. So part of our planning process, of course, initially was to make sure we were compliant with that. It's much easier for us now to be very flexible, I think, with what we're doing to move into any different phase, because we've had so much experience of lots of different ways of working. Of course, our bread and butter is face-to-face learning and everybody being in school. So that's, for us, something that we've had years of experience, but we've now had lots of experience of distance learning, and now we're getting some good experience of blended learning. And of course, we'll be adapting and changing as we go to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our students and our parents as well. Going down, so if our kids were asked by the school not to come due to suspected publication, would the class be taught online? Again, exactly the same answer I've had before, that they would continue with their work that they've been set from the last time they're in school, and they would have access to Group C online lessons. Again, you know, the teachers would still be teaching their classes in their lessons. If the teacher was off school, of course, they'd be teaching online as well. So we're not going to have any particular change to the way school is approached, but they will have access to online lessons through Group C as well. And I think, is it? No, there's a few more. Please forward special thanks. Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate that. We certainly will pass this on. Our staff get a lot of comfort from the thank you messages that come through, by the way. It's and I do share them as well. We have a weekly staff briefing where I will talk about the various issues that we have within the school, and I will also always pass on your thanks. And also, you know, it's from us to you, I think, is a huge thank you as well, because you've been very patient with a very difficult situation. We understand, of course, from your point of view, that life isn't easy, having your children in school sometimes and not at school others, having to help them at home if they're younger children as well, but also the fact that you are sending very thoughtful emails into us as well. On occasion, I've had an unprecedented amount of emails. Nice to use the word unprecedented in a positive way there, that show we're doing a fabulous job in the school. And I think, you know what, I really appreciate that you're saying we're doing a fabulous job in the school. And you know, we're not going to please everybody all of the time, of course we're not, but we're certainly going to do our very best to make sure that that all of our children have continuity in their learning. I think that, unless I've missed any questions out, I think that's all of the questions. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been very well attended, this house. I do hope that's been useful. As I said earlier, the session that Mr. Moyes will run on Sunday and Monday, I think he'll be running, but we'll be sending out some more information on that. We'll give some more information about how the secondary school are approaching things. We are listening to feedback, by the way. We are talking about it continually. So if you do send feedback through, it is listened to, and we look at whether or not we can practically implement different suggestions. Mrs. Hilton did some brilliant sessions last week, and again we had so many positive comments about that we were overwhelmed with the positive comments we had. And I think from Mrs. Hilton's point of view, you know, she's not even in Qatar or even in the school, but she's able to run things very, very effectively from where she is, and we hope to have her here in the next few days. But you will hopefully have had lots of your questions answered then. One of the things we need to do is continue to communicate with you, and I hope we're not going to over communicate. I certainly don't want to under communicate. I think we've communicated quite often with you. I hope you're finding it useful. We're going to continue to run these kind of sessions. It's not just going to all be COVID related sessions. We are going to continue to have some level of normality. So we will be running sessions about how you can help your child in various different subjects, how you can help your Key Stage 4 and 5 students or sons and daughters with their study skills and managing their studies and things like that. So we will have some sessions online than we would have done ordinarily in the school as well. And I think what this gives us, this technology, is it gives us the opportunity to be able to run them at the kind of times we're running them now, and actually have a much broader appeal to people, because of course you're all very busy, and coming to school for a face-to-face session for many of you is quite difficult, and quite honestly you're probably exhausted after a day's work as well. So doing this hopefully gives us an opportunity to get to more of you, and we'll be doing that as the year goes on. If you have suggestions for those kind of sessions, then again we're open to that. We can't of course run a session every single suggestion, but hopefully we'll cover as many as we can. And I think from my point of view, that's it. Thank you very much again for joining us, and if you have any questions that occur to you afterwards, then please do send them into the email address that came out in the initial invitation. Thanks once again for all of your support. I think you know, the community of Parkhouse is fabulous. I'm now in my 4th year of being principal, and I still every day feel I'm exceedingly lucky to be doing that, because we have such a wonderful community, we have wonderful children, and we have fantastic teachers. So I think there's a very positive way forward for us as a school, and I think that we just need to get through the next few weeks and make the improvements and changes, and we'll start to get back to normal eventually, and I think that'll be a very positive place to be. So have a good evening everybody, and we will we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.